Have you ever noticed how easy it is to say the right words and still wake up feeling that money is just as far away as it was yesterday? Maybe you've whispered them while getting ready for work. Maybe you've repeated them in the car, or quietly to yourself before opening another email, another bill, another banking app. Money comes to me easily. I am worthy of abundance. For a brief moment you want to believe them. Then, almost without thinking, you reach for your phone. Your eyes search the screen with that tiny spark of hope we rarely admit to anyone. Maybe today something has changed. Maybe a payment arrived. Maybe an opportunity finally appeared. But the numbers tell the same story they told yesterday. And something inside you quietly lets go of expecting anything different. That is the moment most people never question. It's almost as if there were an invisible door standing between the words we speak and the life we keep trying to reach. A door we talk toward every day without ever finding the handle. Florence Scovel Shinn understood that doorway long before modern psychology began exploring how repeated thoughts shape the mind. She believed the problem was rarely the words themselves. The real question was whether those words were carrying the emotional truth that could give them life. Today, I want to show you why some words become empty echoes, while others become the beginning of a completely different financial story. Florence Scovel Shinn would have seen Eleanor's evenings very differently. Long before the game of life and how to play it made her one of the most influential voices in the New Thought movement, Florence had already begun noticing a quiet pattern in the people around her. They often spoke with hope, but lived with expectation in the opposite direction. Their words reached toward one future while their deepest assumptions kept pulling them back to another. That observation became one of the foundations of her teaching. To Florence, words were never empty sounds drifting into the universe. They were expressions of an inner agreement. Every declaration carried something deeper than vocabulary alone. The feeling, expectation, and quiet conviction beneath it. And that unseen layer mattered. Imagine sending a text to someone that says, "I'm fine." The words look calm. But if your hands are trembling, your chest is tight, and every part of you feels hurt, the person reading it often senses that something doesn't match. Even through a screen, we recognize when words and emotion are telling different stories. Florence believed our relationship with life works in much the same way. It isn't only what we say that shapes our experience. It's the inner atmosphere those words are spoken from. When our language points toward abundance while our deeper expectation remains fixed on disappointment, we quietly rehearse the old story instead of creating space for a new one. Eleanor didn't know any of this. She only knew that every evening ended the same way. She repeated the words she hoped would change her life. She reached for her phone. She searched the screen for a sign that something had shifted. And when nothing had, her body accepted the disappointment before her mind could argue with it. The next morning, she promised herself she would believe harder. She never stopped to wonder whether belief was something you could force. What Eleanor was experiencing wasn't a lack of discipline, weak faith, or failure. It was the natural result of repeating words while carrying an emotional pattern that had never been questioned. No one had ever shown her that there were two conversations happening at the same time. One she could hear, and another her mind had been quietly practicing for years. Understanding the difference between those two conversations changes everything. The next morning, Eleanor stood at the bathroom mirror the way she always did, reading the words off the sticky note in the same tired voice. "I release all fear around money." And before she'd even finished the sentence, a second thought arrived, uninvited, the way it always did. "That's not going to change anything." It came so fast, so automatically, that she never even noticed it as a separate thought. It simply felt like the truth arriving on time, the way it always had. That's the part almost nobody explains. Think of a stretch of grass behind a house, walked across the same way every single day for years. Eventually the grass gives up. A path forms, hard-packed dirt, worn smooth, the easiest way across the yard. You don't decide to take that path anymore. Your feet just go there on their own because it's the path that already exists. Saying a new sentence one morning is like stepping into the grass a few feet to the left of that path. It's unfamiliar, takes effort. And if you only try it once, the grass springs back, and the old path is still right there the next day, waiting, easier than ever. This is what had been happening to Eleanor for years, though she never had language for it. Every time she doubted herself around money, every late payment, every apology for asking to be paid on time, every quiet story that said people like her don't get to feel secure, she had walked that same path a little deeper. The affirmations she said each morning were real, but they were single footsteps in the grass, next to a path worn down by thousands. One sentence, spoken once, was never going to compete with that. It wasn't that Eleanor lacked faith. It was that she'd never been shown the difference between saying something new and actually walking it, again and again, until it became the easier path, the one her feet would choose without her having to think about it at all. That night something small happened. Eleanor caught the second thought arriving, that's not going to change anything. And for the first time in years, instead of walking it like she always had, she simply noticed it standing there. She didn't argue with it. She didn't try to force it away. She just looked at it, the way you might look at a path you've been taking out of habit, and wonder quietly what would happen if you stepped somewhere else instead. It was such a small moment. She almost didn't notice it happening. But it was the first step of a very different path. Because money, in Eleanor's life, had never really been about the numbers in her account. It had been about which path her mind walked first. Every time a bill arrived, every time a client paid late, every time she had to ask for what she was owed. The old path always got there before she did. It answered for her, in that same tired voice, before she'd even decided how she wanted to feel. For the first time, she was learning that the path wasn't the only way across. Eleanor woke up before her alarm the next day, which almost never happened. She lay there for a moment, not quite sure why she felt different, until she remembered the night before. The small, quiet moment of simply noticing the old thought instead of obeying it. She hadn't expected that to change anything. And yet, here she was, awake a few minutes early, feeling strangely unhurried. She stood at the mirror, and before saying anything, she asked herself a strange question. What would it actually feel like if this were already true? Not the words, the feeling underneath them. First, nothing came. She stood in front of the mirror, feeling a little foolish, waiting for an emotion that wasn't there. Then she remembered something unrelated to money entirely. A Sunday morning years ago, sitting on her porch with coffee, no plans, no one needing anything from her. Just a quiet, settled feeling that everything, for that 1 hour, was exactly enough. She let herself sit inside that feeling for a moment. And only then did she say the words, "I release all fear around money." This time something was different. Not the sentence. The ground underneath it. A compass needle doesn't move because someone tells it which way to point. You can turn the compass in your hand and force the needle wherever you like. But the moment you let go, it swings straight back to true north, because it isn't obeying your hand. It's responding to a field it can't see, one that was there before you ever picked the compass up. Words work the same way. You can force a sentence out of your mouth as many times as you want, but if the feeling underneath it doesn't match, it swings right back to whatever you actually believe the instant you stop pushing. What Eleanor had done that morning without fully realizing it was stop forcing the needle and instead give it something real to align with. A genuine feeling, borrowed from an ordinary Sunday, standing in for the abundance she hadn't felt yet toward money, but had absolutely felt somewhere else in her life. Florence Scovel Shinn never used the word alignment, but she understood exactly this. She wrote about the difference between a wish, which strains and pushes, and a conviction, which simply rests in what it already knows. A wish tries to force the needle. A conviction lets it settle. Eleanor said the same 6 words she'd said every morning for months. But that morning, for the first time, she wasn't performing them. She was standing inside something true, and letting the sentence describe it instead of the other way around. She didn't feel different walking out the door. Nothing around her had changed yet. But something had shifted quietly, in the one place that mattered most. The place money had been listening to all along, long before it ever showed up in her account. She drove to her first client that day the same way she always did, past the same gas station, the same intersection where she always caught the light red. Nothing about the outside world had rearranged itself overnight. But Eleanor noticed something she hadn't expected. She wasn't bracing the way she usually did before opening her laptop to check which invoices were still unpaid. For years, she had approached that screen already flinching, already certain of what she'd find. That morning, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she simply looked. It was such a small difference. Almost nothing. But it was the first time in a long while that Eleanor had walked toward money without carrying dread in front of her like a shield. 3 days later, a client texted Eleanor asking if she could wait until next month for payment. Again, the old response was automatic. She knew it before she even picked up the phone. The apologetic tone, the quick of course, no worries at all, the way she'd smooth it over so the client wouldn't feel uncomfortable, even though she was the one owed money. Even though rent was due in 9 days. She'd been doing this for as long as she could remember, not just with clients, with her ex-husband, who'd controlled every dollar in their marriage while telling her she was bad with money, with her mother, who'd raised her to believe that wanting more than enough was a kind of greed. Somewhere back there, Eleanor had learned that asking to be paid, plainly and without apology, made her difficult, ungrateful, too much. She sat with her phone in her hand for a long moment, and then, quietly, she asked herself the same question she'd been asking every morning. What would this feel like if I actually believed I deserved to be paid on time? She thought of her father actually, not her mother, a man who'd never once apologized for asking for what he was owed, who'd taught her, without meaning to, that there was a version of this that didn't feel like conflict at all. Just clarity. She borrowed that. She let herself feel it, just for a second. Then she typed, "I understand things are tight. I'll need payment by Friday to keep things on track for both of us." She sent it before she could take it back. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear this time. From doing something unfamiliar. The client replied within the hour. "Friday works. Sorry for the delay." It was such a small exchange. Nobody watching Eleanor's life from the outside would have called it a turning point. But something in her chest had moved that hadn't moved in years. The part that had spent decades believing that asking for money made her someone people would resent. If any of this feels familiar, if you've ever softened a request for money until it barely counted as one, you're not alone in it, and I'd love to know in the comments which part found you first. Eleanor didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. She didn't know that the version of herself who could send that message without apologizing for it was the exact version of herself money had been waiting to meet. She just knew that for the first time in a long while. She felt something underneath her ribs that wasn't dread. Felt unmistakably like relief. She sat at her kitchen table for a while after that, not doing anything in particular, just noticing the quiet. For years, moments like this had left her drained, replaying the conversation, wondering if she'd been too much. This time there was nothing to replay. She had said what needed to be said, and then she had simply stopped, the way a sentence stops when it's finished, rather than lingering to apologize for having been spoken at all. For the first time, Eleanor wasn't just saying the words. She was becoming the kind of person they were true for. A week later, an old contact reached out. Someone Eleanor hadn't heard from in over a year, asking if she'd be interested in taking on a much larger client. Full-time books for a growing company. Real money, steady money, the kind she'd stopped letting herself imagine. Her first instinct was the old one. Say yes to whatever they offer. Don't ask for too much. Be grateful they thought of you at all. She caught herself mid-thought, the way she'd been learning to. Florence Scovel Shinn had a word for the kind of statement Eleanor needed in that moment, one she used deliberately in her own writing. A decree. Not a hope. Not a request sent quietly into the universe and hoped for. A decree was something closer to a claim, spoken the way you'd state a fact that had already happened, rather than something you were still waiting on. But Eleanor had tried that kind of language before months ago, in front of the mirror, and it hadn't worked. She knew now why. A decree spoken without the feeling underneath, it is just a louder version of the same empty sentence. It's a compass being turned by hand, forced toward a direction it doesn't actually agree with. The words can sound certain. The feeling underneath them has to be certain too, or the whole thing swings back the moment you stop pushing. So before she replied to the message, Eleanor sat with it for a minute. She let herself feel, honestly, what this opportunity meant. Not performed confidence. Actual recognition that she was good at her work, that she had been underpaid for it for years, that asking for what she was worth was not an act of greed but simply an act of accuracy. Then she wrote back, "I'd love to talk. My rate for full-service bookkeeping is $85 an hour." She hadn't said a number like that out loud in years. She didn't apologize for it in the next sentence. She didn't soften it with a joke or an "if that works for you." She let the sentence stand exactly as it was. A fact, not a hope. The reply came back within the day. "That works. When can we start?" Eleanor read the message twice. Then she set her phone down and sat very still for a moment, feeling something she hadn't expected to feel this early in the process. Not excitement exactly. Something steadier than that. It felt like she had finally stopped asking money to believe her, and started believing herself first. There was no dramatic music in that moment. No confetti. No sudden windfall landing in her account overnight. Just an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a message on her phone, and a number she'd spoken plainly instead of apologizing for. But something about that ordinariness felt important to her later when she thought back on it. She had always assumed that changing her relationship with money would feel enormous when it finally happened. A lightning bolt kind of moment, unmistakable and dramatic. Instead, it had felt almost quiet. Like something settling into place that had simply been waiting for her to stop resisting it. Florence had written about that too in her own way. That the biggest shifts rarely announce themselves. They simply arrive, disguised as an ordinary afternoon, once the inner agreement has finally changed. Something curious happened in the weeks after Eleanor sent that message about her new rate. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody handed her a windfall. But small things started arriving with a frequency she hadn't noticed before. A former client, one who'd gone quiet over a year ago, emailed asking if she was taking on new work. An old invoice she'd written off in her mind as a loss finally got paid, out of nowhere, with a brief apology attached. A woman at her gym mentioned needing a bookkeeper and asked, almost in passing, what Eleanor charged. And for the first time, Eleanor answered without flinching before the number left her mouth. None of it felt like magic. That was the strange part. It felt more like something had quietly stopped blocking the door, and ordinary opportunities that had always been circling nearby were simply able to reach her now. Florence Scovel Shinn would have said this wasn't coincidence, and she wouldn't have meant it mystically. She meant it practically. A woman who flinches before naming her rate sends a signal, whether she intends to or not. Hesitation, apology, a kind of smallness that people respond to, usually by offering less or by not offering at all. A woman who states her worth plainly sends a different signal entirely. People don't consciously calculate this. They simply feel it, the way you feel it when someone believes what they're telling you, versus when they're hoping you won't ask too many questions. Eleanor hadn't changed the market. She'd changed the frequency she was showing up at. And the market, full of people making quick, half-conscious judgments, had simply started responding to someone standing on steadier ground. She started keeping a small note in her phone, almost without meaning to. Not a gratitude journal, nothing formal. Just a line every few days whenever something shifted. Paid on time. Asked for my full rate and got it. Said no to a discount I would have given away a year ago. Small sentences. But reading them back, she noticed something she hadn't expected. The woman writing them sounded nothing like the one who used to check her banking app at 11 at night, bracing for disappointment. She was becoming one ordinary Tuesday at a time. The kind of woman these things simply happened to now. It would have been easy to believe at that point that the hardest part was over. It wasn't. Because there's a difference between a good week and a settled belief. And Eleanor hadn't fully arrived at the second one yet. The old fear had gone quiet, not gone. It was still there, underneath the small wins, waiting for the moment that would actually test whether anything had truly changed, or whether she'd simply gotten lucky for a few weeks in a row. That moment was closer than she realized. 2 weeks into the new contract, Eleanor sat down to invoice her biggest client yet, and the fear came back. Not gently. All at once, the way it used to. What if they think I'm charging too much? What if this was a mistake? What if it all falls apart and I end up right back where I started? She almost reached for the old habit, smiling through it, telling herself she was fine, forcing a decree she didn't feel, the way she used to force the words in the mirror. But this time she stopped herself before she did. Because here is the part almost nobody tells you when they teach you to speak with confidence about money. Pretending you're not afraid is not the same thing as alignment. It's just a quieter, more polished version of the same forcing. A compass held still by your hand looks calm from the outside. It's still not pointing anywhere true. So instead, Eleanor did something different. She let herself feel the fear honestly, without rushing past it. Yes, this is uncertain. Yes, part of me is scared it won't last. She said that to herself plainly, the way you'd admit something to a friend, not the way you'd confess a failure. And only after that, once the fear had been acknowledged instead of buried under a decree it couldn't support, did she return to the feeling she actually trusted. The Sunday morning porch. The sense that she was, underneath all of it, someone who was going to be fine. That was the difference. Not the absence of fear. The refusal to let fear speak the only sentence. This is the part of Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching that gets flattened the most, in every version of it that gets repeated online. People here decree your way to abundance, and assume it means forcing a smile over real doubt until the doubt gives up. Shinn never taught that. What she taught was closer to honesty followed by choice. Feel what's true, then decide deliberately which truth you're going to stand on. Eleanor sent the invoice. She didn't feel invincible doing it. She felt like a woman who was afraid and did it anyway, from a place that was steadier than the fear. 3 days later the payment came through. Full amount. No questions. And somewhere in that small, unremarkable moment, Eleanor understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. The words had never been the hidden part. The hidden part was learning which feeling to stand on when it mattered most. If you've ever said the right words and felt like a fraud saying them, this might be why. Not because the words were wrong, and not because you didn't want it badly enough. Somewhere along the way, most of us were taught that confidence meant the absence of fear, that you weren't allowed to speak abundance until the doubt disappeared completely. But doubt rarely disappears on its own schedule. It softens slowly. The more often you choose the truer feeling instead of waiting for the scared one to leave first. Eleanor hadn't stopped being afraid of money entirely. She had simply stopped letting that fear be the only voice in the room, and started giving the steadier one a chance to speak too, even when it was quieter, even when it hadn't fully proven itself yet. That, it turned out, was enough. Eleanor's story didn't happen all at once, and yours won't either. It happened one sentence at a time. One moment where she chose the truer feeling instead of the practiced one. One message sent without an apology folded into it. One invoice that went out anyway, even scared. That's the part nobody puts on a highlight reel. There was no single morning where everything changed. There were dozens of small ones, each one a little easier than the last, because the path underneath them was slowly becoming the easier one to walk. You don't have to wait for a perfect moment to begin your own. You don't need the mirror or the sticky note, or even the quiet porch memory Eleanor borrowed. You just need one honest sentence, and a willingness to notice when you're only performing it instead of standing inside it. That noticing, more than anything else, is where this actually begins. Tonight, before you close this video, I want you to choose one sentence. Not a long list of affirmations you'll forget by tomorrow. Just one, something you actually want to be true, said the way Eleanor learned to say hers, from underneath, not from the surface. Mine tonight is this. I am worthy of receiving money easily, without earning my worth first. I'd love for you to write yours in the comments below. Just the sentence, exactly as you'd say it if you meant it completely. Not for anyone else to judge or approve. Just so you've said it somewhere outside your own head, which is often the first real step toward believing it. If this video found you at the right moment, if some part of Eleanor's story felt a little too familiar, there's a good chance it will find someone else at the right moment too. Someone who's been saying the right words for months, wondering why nothing has moved yet. Someone who's still asking for less than she's owed, just to keep the peace. If she comes to mind while you're watching this, consider sending it to her. Sometimes the words that finally land are the ones that arrive from someone who already knows us. Not from a stranger, not from an algorithm, but from a person who thought of us specifically. And if you'd like more of these, the teachings of Florence Scovel Shinn, told through stories like Eleanor's, the ones that help you actually feel a law instead of just reading about it. Subscribing means you won't miss the next one, and it helps this channel reach more women who are standing exactly where Eleanor once stood, saying the right words to a door they haven't found the handle to yet. We're almost at the end. But Eleanor's story isn't quite finished. There's one more thing that happened to her. Something she didn't expect, and something I think you need to hear before tonight is over. 6 months later, Eleanor sat across from a younger woman named Priya at a coffee shop near her old office. Priya had just started freelancing, graphic design mostly for small businesses, and had reached out to Eleanor for advice on the financial side of things. Halfway through their conversation, Priya mentioned, almost as an aside, that a client had asked her to redo an entire branding package for free, calling it exposure. "I probably should just do it," Priya said. "It's good for my portfolio." Eleanor felt the old sentence rise up in her, the one she would have said herself a year earlier. Just be grateful someone wants to work with you. Don't make it complicated. She almost said it. And then she heard very clearly what that sentence actually was. Not wisdom. Fear dressed up as practicality. The same fear that had kept her apologizing for invoices, shrinking every ask down to something easier to swallow. So instead she said something else. You can decide that if you want to. But I'd ask yourself honestly, is this generosity? Or is this the same story that tells women our work is worth less until we've proven it enough times? 'Cause I believed that story for a long time. It cost me years I can't get back. Priya went quiet for a moment. Eleanor hadn't planned to say any of that. It simply arrived, the way the truer feeling had started arriving on its own, without her having to force it to the surface anymore. Later that evening back home, she opened her banking app the way she always had, an old habit that had never fully disappeared. But this time there was no drop in her chest before the numbers even loaded. She looked at the balance the way you might glance at the weather. Simple information, nothing more. It occurred to her, sitting there, that the door from all those months ago hadn't led to a single dramatic moment after all. It had led to this. An ordinary evening, an ordinary balance she no longer flinched at, and a conversation with a stranger where she'd become, without meaning to, the voice that finally said the thing someone else needed to hear. She thought of her sticky note, still there on the mirror, though she barely needed to read it anymore. The words had stopped being something she said to convince herself. They had simply become true. Eleanor didn't tell Priya about Florence Scovel Shinn that afternoon, or the compass, or the path worn into the grass behind some imagined house. She didn't mention decrees or alignment, or any of the language she'd slowly learned over the past year. She simply told the truth, from a place that had finally stopped performing it. Maybe that was the actual lesson underneath all of it, that this was never really about memorizing the right sentence, or finding the perfect words to unlock something external. It was about becoming, quietly and slowly, someone whose words and feelings finally agreed with each other. Once that happened, the right sentence tended to arrive on its own, exactly when it was needed, without her having to search for it in a mirror anymore. Eleanor still didn't have everything she wanted. There were still slow months, still clients who paid late, still moments the old fear tried to speak first. But the door had opened, and once a door opens, even quietly, even without fanfare, it tends to stay that way. There is a door in your house you have never opened. Do you remember that? From the very beginning of tonight. I want you to picture it again, now that you know what's actually on the other side. It was never a locked door. It never needed a special key, or a rare kind of luck, or a version of you that felt fully confident before you were allowed to walk through it. It only needed one thing. A sentence spoken from somewhere true, instead of somewhere performed. Eleanor didn't find that overnight. Neither will you, and that's all right. She found it one invoice at a time, one honest sentence at a time. One evening where she chose the steadier feeling over the practiced one, even when the practiced one was easier to reach for. You already have a door like that. Maybe it's a message you've been softening before you send it. Maybe it's a number you've never said out loud because saying it felt like too much. Maybe it's simply the sticky note on your own mirror, the one you read every morning in a voice that doesn't quite believe itself yet. That's all right. Belief was never the starting point. Honesty was. Florence Scovel Shinn spent her life trying to tell people something simple, in 100 different ways, across 100 different pages, that the words we speak are never separate from the life we're living. They are the life we're living, quietly becoming visible. Not because saying them is magic, because saying them from somewhere true, is how a woman finally agrees with herself about what she deserves. You deserve to stop softening every request until it barely counts as one. You deserve a decree, not just a hope. Say one thing tonight like you mean it. No 10. Not a list you'll forget by morning. One sentence, chosen honestly. Said the way you'd say something you already knew to be true. Let it be small if it needs to be small. Let it be a single line about a single evening, if that's all you can reach tonight. The size was never what mattered. The truth underneath it was. And somewhere tonight, whether you feel ready for it or not, there is a door standing slightly open, waiting on nothing but one honest sentence from you. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If Eleanor's story felt like a little too much like your own, I hope you'll carry one piece of it with you. Not the fear, but the moment right after it, where she chose to speak anyway. I'll be back soon with another story. Another law Florence understood long before the rest of us caught up to her. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of the words you're standing on. I'll see you on the other side of the door.